Dr. Oliver Morgan, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, David. I'm very much looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm glad to have you on the show. I'm especially interested in attachment theory. And so I was grabbed by the title of your book, which is Addiction, Attachment, Trauma, Recovery, The Power of Connection.
Yes.
So all of those elements really spoke to me. And so I really wanted to seek you out. So why this particular book at this particular time?
Well, let me give you the overview here. I've known for a while, for a long time, that I had bad genes.
Oh,
Um,
really?
all my uncles and my maternal grandfather died of alcoholism.
Wow.
And so I knew that was going on. And when I was in doctoral studies many moons ago, um, I decided I wanted to look at not so much at alcoholism, but at recovery.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
what did that look like? So
Right.
I did my doctoral degree in that. And then when the university hired me, they asked me if I would oversee. We had a state approved program of 3 courses in addiction studies. And they asked me if I would take that over. So I did and found a program that was not really very much up to snuff. What I mean by that is a lot, and I did some studies on that afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, they spent a lot of time in the program. One course was in prevention.
Okay.
They had another course of special issues, but the main course in addiction was mostly a course about addiction. These are drugs. These are what drugs do to you.
Oh, yeah.
And this is how you know it's an illness. And that's pretty much where it stopped. Nothing on relapse prevention, nothing on recovery at all. And when I went through, so this is 1990, recovery studies were just in their infancy.
Okay.
So I was able to do some studies about that. And so I've been teaching ever since 1990 on in addiction.
Yeah. So this book is probably the culmination of your learnings, right?
At the present time, that's right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I
And
was really good.
yeah, you mentioned that the genes were stacked against you.
Yes,
And from reading the book, I understand that you struggled personally with addiction to alcohol
yes,
for much of your life. Uh,
yes.
Maybe not surprising, given the genetic background, at least. How were you able to achieve sobriety? You're talking about recovery. How were you able to get to, because I understand you've been sober for quite a while.
They're over 30 years.
That's
Um,
congratulations.
Thank you. It came very simply, to be honest with you. I had known about this for a while. I'd been going to AA meetings periodically, but I'd always introduced myself as a researcher who was interested in studying alcoholism.
Yes, right.
And the first person who
Surely somebody confronted you on that.
well, let me tell you, the person who became my first sponsor
Uh-huh.
said, "I've seen you here for a while. What are you doing here?" And I gave the line, that I was researching. And he said, "Oh, that's good." He said, "You may not be an alcoholic, but you'll do till one shows up." And I was so intrigued with that I stayed and talked with him afterwards, and from that started getting more involved in AA and going to meetings and going to prisons with meetings and different things like that. So they kind of wrapped me in. But teaching about addiction was really helpful to get me started. I was teaching the disease model and talking about genetics and all that stuff, which was stuff I knew, but it wasn't satisfying. Um, and I kind of latched onto this thing about, is addiction a disease? Yes, but it's not only a disease. it's not only a brain disease. There's a lot more going on. And I decided after 30 some years of doing that, I wanted to find out what that more was,
Yeah,
and have a deeper sense of what was going on. So I started um, really reading around in different kinds of theories, and I came across several different books. One was Gabor Mate's. I don't know if you know Gabor.
I
He's
interviewed him.
uh-huh, the
Yeah, I've not met him, but I
Realm
did
of
do.
Hungry Ghosts.
Yes, I interviewed him around that book. Yeah.
Yes, he's a great guy. Um, and there I began to become interested in attachment.
Uh-huh.
And then the attachment idea led me to look at addiction and trauma in a different way. And then the last piece of it was looking at social ecology,
Okay. Well, we're going to get
how
into
both
all
addiction
that.
and recovery. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We're going to get into all that. I've got some specific questions designed to uh, draw you out in those areas. But before I do, um, we were talking about addiction, and I'm wondering, are we talking only substance addiction, or are we also talking things like internet addiction, sex addiction, gambling addiction, iPhone addiction, etc.?
David, as I this all unfolded for me as I looked at the research, and one of the people I got in touch with to help mentor me through this was Bruce Alexander in Canada.
Okay.
He has a book called Globalization of Addiction,
Mm.
which really opened my eyes. So what I really talk about with people is addiction to substances is an important piece of the puzzle, but that's really a solution to a problem. Addiction isn't the problem, it's the solution. And what problem is it a solution of? It's a solution to attachment difficulties. And so if you think of it that way, then people can cope with attachment difficulties with different kinds of attachments. So certainly chemical substances is one. We know now that gambling, gaming, internet addiction is another. We've known for a while, although not officially, that sex addiction was a real addiction. So what I talk about is behavioral addictions, substance addictions, and then the third category that I talk about is what I call disordered attachments, so that people can become addicted to power, to celebrity, to wealth.
Yeah, we've seen some examples of all of that recently.
Haven't we really? Yeah.
Yes.
I used to say to my students, I can't really talk about what we've seen recently without getting into political stuff. But
Yeah.
I tell my students, if you don't believe that addiction to power or wealth is a real addiction, take a look at the Amazon and what we're doing to the forests in the Amazon, which is the Earth's lungs. And
Yeah.
that's all what we're doing is driven by power and wealth, and they don't care what it's doing to the rest of us.
Yeah. It's all a short-term focus for people who. It's surprising that some of the very wealthy and powerful people in the world have uh, a short-term focus. I can understand the poor farmer in the Amazon who says, "I got to feed myself, and this is the only way I know to do it." So
Right.
yeah, you can cut down these trees so I can grow a crop, and I can support my family. But you look at somebody who's got a lot of resources and still is taking such a short-term view that it's destroying our world. But I want to go back to, you mentioned that you've been driven, your research has been driven by two theoretical perspectives that have informed your views. And one was interpersonal neurobiology,
Yes.
which is abbreviated INBP. And and social ecology, or SE. And I know that uh, the interpersonal neurobiology is one of the people that's associated with is Lou Cosolino, who I got to
Yeah,
interview once or twice, and he wrote a beautiful introduction to your book. So,
he did, didn't he?
yeah, that's a feather in your cap. What, you haven't read it?
Oh no, I've read it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
You
and I
should.
read a lot of his stuff. Interestingly
Yeah,
enough,
yeah.
David, I had a draft that I was kind of shopping around to different things, and I had
Uh,
read a number of Lou's books, and in fact,
okay.
one of his main ideas is the social brain,
Yeah.
and um, so I sent him a couple chapters, and I said, I'm not sure what I where I want to go with this, and he wrote back several different uh, responses, and then finally said, why don't you want to submit this to the interpersonal neurobiology series at Norton? And I said, well, gee, I was thinking that's kind of above where I am. He said, I'm the editor of that.
That's
So
great.
I said,
Yeah, because
okay.
Norton is, I can understand that you would feel intimidated because that's really become the go-to place for respectable research-based books
Yeah.
in psychology and psychotherapy. And so I've interviewed quite a few of their authors, and that's often my go-to place. So
Okay.
take us into a bit into the ideas of interpersonal neurobiology, because I'm not sure how many people have a sense of that. And give us your sense of that, and then the social ecology. Tell us what those two have brought into your thinking and in your life.
Okay. Um, interpersonal neurobiology talks about, I go into it through Lou's door, that the biology of the brain is really formed by our relationships. That one of the phrases that I really like is that biography becomes biology. And I was so intrigued
Yeah.
with the almost alchemical piece of this, that
Uh-huh.
it seemed something relational can become physical matter.
Yeah.
And what happens with that? I was so captured by that idea that I kept exploring it, and it really has opened up a number of things for me. So if we're born um, not only open to but expecting positive relationships, if those don't happen, which is kind of the definition of trauma, then that adversity can lead us in many different directions. If that doesn't happen for us because we're expecting it, that's not just a lack of something, that's a positive trauma. So even neglect and indifference from parenting figures, people who are supposed to be there to nurture us, is experienced as a loss by the child, is experienced as adverse.
Yeah, I think
And
you point
that,
out that because we're kind of wired to get that.
that's right,
So it's not like it's just something that we wouldn't notice,
right,
but we are primed, hungry for that.
exactly.
Yeah.
And what does that do to the brain? So if positive experiences shape the brain that we have and shape it in normal and healthy ways, what do those adversities do to wire the brain? And that's from there it kind of led me into looking at stress systems in the
Uh-huh.
brain,
Yeah.
um, pain systems in the brain. One of the things that's being explored now is how much the physical pain systems appear to have been co-opted, so that even experiencing death and a loss is experienced as painful. And so they're not precise analogous things in the brain, but they are close enough that we experience suffering. And so that led me to look at what does a lack of attachment, what does adversity do to wire their brain so that it is more vulnerable um, to the introduction of chemicals that can bring pleasure, that can bring distraction and things like that. And
Uh-huh.
it's,
So there's a connection you're seeing there that,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And it seems to me that until we can get a real good sense of that, it's not, that really takes us beyond the genetics. So it's not just, do I have this vulnerability? But it's also epigenetics. Is this vulnerability turned on?
Mhm.
And is the wiring in my brain now susceptible because of experiences working with the genes that I become much more vulnerable than I might have been other. I might not have ever been vulnerable if the gene wasn't turned on.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And it's
that,
also interesting that the this recognition of the interpersonal neurobiology, you said biography changes biology,
yeah,
and I think psychotherapists have taken, in general, kind of comfort from that. Sort of see what we're doing isn't just talking; it's real. It has a real effect on the brain,
yes.
and so
One
I
of
interrupted your flow there.
no,
Go
no,
ahead.
that's okay. One of the things I take from that is that um, as we grow up, the relationships that are in our lives not only help to build the actual matter in our brains, but
Mhm.
my early training was really in object relations and attachment theory. So it's not just the matter in our brains, it's also the inner objects that we incorporate, and they get matched to different brain cycles. So
Yeah.
it really is what Alan Shore calls a psychobiological process.
Hmm. And what about social ecology?
Right.
I haven't really run into that term before.
Well, it's interesting. There were people. Yuri Bronfenbrenner, of course, talks about it a bit. Um, there are other writers who talk about social ecology. I got into thinking about that in part because of you probably know about the Pope's first letter where he talked about the connection between destruction of the planet and destruction of ourselves. So there's a connection that he makes. And I was intrigued by that. I was intrigued with Bronfenbrenner's work, but I also became very interested in um, disequities in the way health is distributed. And I
Yeah.
started looking at this concept that the globalization of addiction talks about, which is that there are upstream factors that affect what happens downstream.
Okay. What's the
So if
upstream and the
addiction is a
downstream?
downstream effect,
Yeah.
health inequities are an upstream factor.
So things like in the book, you get into things like the neighborhood that one grows up in, one's ethnic and racial status and
Yes.
social status. These have, and this is becoming more and more apparent to us, with the Black Lives Matter movement bringing all of this inequity really forward.
Yes.
And it's got real health effects, including addiction.
Very real health effects. One of the things I've been thinking about and exploring is that some of the same factors that affect risk for addiction affected those who got COVID first and got it more severely. So
Mm,
the health inequities that are experienced by people in the African American community and people in other disadvantaged communities, the unemployed, prisons, all of those risk factors that come from health equities also impact in addiction.
yeah.
And so it really bolstered for me my notion of what happens when adversities are not just personal experiences, but they're also social effects.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to come back to that towards the end of our conversation here because I'm going to want to talk a bit more about COVID. You brought it up, and but we'll put that on hold for now, as if it can be put on hold.
Right.
And another notion that has impacted your thinking is consilience. Tell us about that. That's not I think I've heard that term before, but it wasn't top of mind. Tell us about consilience.
hmm Dan Siegel and Alan Shore talk about consilience a lot. They're two of the main researchers with Lou Cozzolino behind interpersonal neurobiology. And consilience really is a way of thinking and talking. It's also a way of marrying clinical work with research. It studies a phenomenon from different points of view and finds ways to talk about it in a more comprehensive, holistic way.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so in my book, it's a way of bringing together the science of addiction, what we call social science studies, around social ecology and things like that, marrying that with trauma studies, marrying it with literature. So it validates our thinking more holistically,
Yes, yes.
which I
You've
think
got
is
to go.
very important.
There's a quote I pulled out of the book that speaks to this. You write, addiction is not so much an individual misfortune as it is a result and a symptom of larger conditions.
Yes.
Those struggling with substance related and addictive disorders may be harbingers of deeper social dangers. So that last part's pretty interesting. Deeper social dangers. What did you have in mind there? I mean, I think we're seeing it, but
What I have in mind there is that addicts and the fact that we have addictive problems are really the birds, um, the sparrows in the mines,
yeah,
in the coal mines.
yeah, the canary in the mine.
Canaries in the coal mine. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
The um, and those canaries really are alerting us to deeper, more pervasive um, elements that are in the social ecology around us, that surround us.
yeah,
And they're the way of saying, well, how are we doing with this? Another way to think about it is in terms of prevention. We have thrown multiple years of multiple dollars at the problem with addiction, multiple programs, multiple things. And our addiction problem is seemingly not much any better than it was in the mid 1900s. And so why is that? Why is it a problem? It's what I've called in other publications a wicked problem. Why is addiction doesn't seem to be ameliorated by the programs and the money and all that stuff that we throw at it? And I think it's because we haven't taken account of those deeper issues. It's not just about helping a person off substances. Prevention and treatment and recovery really need to be about harnessing the power of our social ecology.
yeah. And
And
it's interesting.
until we are able to create community,
Uh-huh.
real community that ties people to connections that matter to them
Right.
and are building health, social capital, if you will. Um, until we marry our prevention efforts with real community interventions, we're always going to be left without really dealing with the problem.
I haven't read your paper, the attachment as the wicked problem,
Yeah,
uh, but it also brings to mind the fact that instead of listening to the canaries and realizing, okay, they're serving an important function for us, and we need to pay attention to that.
they're telling
We,
us we need more.
yeah, we tend to blame them as we see them as wicked.
Yes.
We've tended to demonize people who are difficult to deal with, because their behavior is outrageous, difficult to deal with. Um, yeah,
if we can begin to listen um, to people in recovery, people who have been on that wicked side of the problem and have found a way back, if we begin to listen to them, we begin to acknowledge that connection is really the way out. AA's told us that for years, but AA is only one example. There are lots of other ways where people can build community back into their lives that can really help them begin to stay on a recovery path. It's connection that does the healing. We know that
yeah,
as psychotherapists, right?
yeah,
In the end, it's the relationship that heals.
yeah. That's we do have a lot of evidence about that. Now, speaking of psychotherapy, you talk about um, addiction sensitive counseling.
Yeah.
And what would that look like? How does addiction sensitive counseling work from counseling or psychotherapy in general? Is there something distinctive? I know people talk about trauma sensitive counseling, for
Mhm.
example, these days. Tell me
I,
about
I
addiction.
borrowed the phrase trauma sensitive, addiction sensitive counseling from trauma sensitive.
Okay, yeah,
So I think that being aware that addiction is so prevalent in our society, especially once you begin to expand it beyond things like substances, but into behaviors, and then into this addiction to celebrity, addiction to wealth, and things. Once you have a sense of how pervasive addiction is, then I think it behooves us to understand some of the dynamics that lead to real recovery. So, looking at the creation of connections really gives us some purchase into how to do an addiction sensitive process. So, I think of helping people learn how to deal with their stressors better. How do we do that? Well, mindfulness is one way. So that moves us in the direction of a mindfulness kind of approach uh, to the clinical work. It leads us to safety. If in fact people struggling with addiction come from a trauma background, maybe not all, but most, they come from a trauma background, it's hard to imagine how they're really going to listen to us if we don't create an atmosphere of safety. And how do we do that? It's partly changing the way we are in the room, being much more welcoming. It's partly teaching people how to cope with those dark inner voices that they carry with themselves. Um, and then it's also giving them some experience with success. I have found a lot that, particularly working with not just addicts, but people who are their family members, they come into treatment. I'm a family therapist by training. They come into treatment already annoyed. They've been promised the world by the addict. Oh, I'm going to stop. I'm never going to do this again. And they fail over and over and over again. So the family is angry and the addict is defeated.
yeah,
I've tried this, it doesn't work. And once I can begin to lay out for them, for example, this is what we know about the brain. This is what we know about that wiring that you have in your head that was formulated long ago, but is still very powerful. It's obvious that when you run into situations where there are lots of triggers, your brain's going to say, "Oh, I know what this is about. Let's go there." And it catches you unaware. One of the things you say to yourself is, "I want to stop. I know I want to stop. I'm really going to give it a good effort this time." But your brain, part of what's in your brain, those triggers catch on to it and give you cravings and other kinds of things that you didn't expect. So let me help you begin to look at those triggers. Let's talk about how you can plan when you get a craving. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
I can tell you, David, when I have three kids, the youngest of whom is Rusty, who's 15, and he still periodically asks me, "Do you still get triggered by things?" And I said, "Oh yeah. If I am in a restaurant and I catch a whiff of scotch or vodka or something like that, I can taste it in the back of my throat, even though I'm 32 years in recovery."
Wow. Yeah.
That's not. And how do you train an addict who's now maybe less than a year clean and sober? How do you train them to get ready for that?
Well, let's answer Rusty's question. What do you do? How do you deal with that when you get that whiff of alcohol?
First thing I do is what I've always done, which is I deal with it with humor. And
Uh,
and so one of the things I say to people is, "Oh, I've got a craving. Anybody else? Anybody else thinking about this?" I make it into a joke to try to
uh-huh,
laugh it away.
uh-huh.
It's not ignoring it. It's honoring. It's honoring what my brain is doing
Yeah.
and paying attention to it, and then saying to myself inside, this is part of the mindfulness practice, saying to myself inside, "You know what that is. Let it go. It's a passing thing. It's not going to be here
Yeah.
forever. You
Yeah.
can live with this. Let's move on to something else."
Uh-huh. And in that process of that sort of psychoeducational approach, which I
Right.
notice is coming in more and more as we understand how the brain and all of these things come together,
Yes.
it really removes the stigma, right, for the addict and the family who are in the room. If they can begin to take that in and see it in that kind of a matrix rather than this person is just weak and
If
criminally
you
minded,
watch,
etc.
if you watch a number of the professional comedians who um, have had a history of addiction themselves,
Yeah.
they all find a way to not to claim the stigma.
Yeah.
So they claim it, they honor what it's doing, and then they make fun of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way of beginning to turn the tables on the stigma, to own it and to say, "Yeah, that's who I am."
Yeah.
And but I have ways to not give in to this.
Hmm. Yeah. You know, we did, one thing we haven't mentioned is that you, in your training and your journey, you went on to get a Doctor of Divinity. So talk to us about that, and I assume you emphasize that that connection is important.
Yes.
And what about spiritual connection? Is that part of what needs to be there? Talk to us about that.
I think the first thing I want to say about that is that it looks different for each different person. For some persons, their spirituality really is built around the 12-step program. And that's a route that I really understand and find still very meaningful for me. But I'm very much aware that not everybody finds that useful.
Yeah.
There are other kinds of community experiences that can be helpful for people. I think Women for Sobriety is another one. Um, there's a whole bunch of other kinds of programs out there that can be really helpful. But for me, it's that connection piece that really is the most spiritual piece of what I want to say about this. Does everybody have to do it through God talk? That's not what I mean by spirituality.
Uh-huh.
For some people, it does involve God talk and other kinds, but for other people, it doesn't have to. It can involve closeness to nature. It can involve other kinds of things that can be really helpful for people at a more spiritual, grounding kind of level.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I have a master's degree. I have a master's degree in divinity and a PhD in pastoral psychology from Boston University. But that's my way into the spirituality. Um,
I'm glad that that you have this broader view rather than a tight, narrow view that I think most people tend to associate with people who have credentials, formal credentials, and religiousness, if you
Yes.
will.
And few people are more allergic to that kind of spiritual talk than addicts. It's the
Yeah,
last thing they want to hear.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but connection, they understand.
yeah.
And
You
I
know,
think
something. Yeah,
for
go ahead.
me, David, that's really the when I'm working with someone who's um, struggling with an addiction, one of the things I try to assess at the beginning is what's their social capital like? So are they still married? Even if it's a conflicted marriage, are they do they have a job? Are they making a salary? All those things that are part of capital say to me, this is a person who has relationships that can buffer them against stress and help them in recovery. And so I I might spend time trying to get them to go to an AA meeting or join up with Women's for Sobriety or some of these other things. But I really am much more interested in how to help them build connections back into their lives because I think that in the end is going to sustain recovery.
Yeah.
And again, that's the spiritual piece for me. It's not whether they can use God talk. When I when I was first in AA myself, I met this guy, and my sponsor at that point, the guy who asked me if or told me that I'd do it until somebody else came along. He kept pointing me in the direction of this man who was there. He looked terrible. He looked like he was living under a bridge. And he said, watch him because he really does all kinds of important things. He had the foulest mouth you can imagine. He is the most unspiritual person you could ever meet. But when he finally, he'd been there a year, kept coming back, and then when he was asked to speak, started talking um, eloquently about how he found God in other people who lived near him under the bridge. And that was his way of giving back, that he kind of was a proselytizer for AA with the other guys who were down and out.
Hmm.
Well, that's deep spirituality, even if it doesn't involve God talk.
Actually, I've heard the notion that there is a spiritual hunger as part of the root of addiction. That is that in there somewhere in what we're saying?
Yes, I've heard that too.
Uh-huh.
And finding God in a bottle is that there's a title about that
Ah,
somewhere.
okay.
And I think that's certainly part of it. Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, used to talk about that all the time. And I think it's useful for us the way I think about that is that it is a hunger. It it betrays a hunger for connection. That people who become addicted really are there because of their vulnerabilities, and their vulnerabilities have opened them up to a kind of spirituality, um, even if it's a defeated spirituality. And I
Uh,
think when people find that recovery, they find an experience that leads them toward deeper meaning. And sometimes that comes in being a good parent. Sometimes that experience comes in being able to make a contribution to society again. But but it's a spirit, an experience of connection that becomes really valuable to them.
what about some? Is there some element in this of a with a substance having an ecstatic experience, at least for a while? and that ecstatic experience could have that component of reaching for God, reaching for something larger than oneself.
When you asked the question, the first thing that popped to my mind is something that I've been reading recently about um, the VA using methamphetamine with returning soldiers with PTSD,
Yeah.
and it
And
helps.
psychedelics, and
Yes,
psychedelics too.
yes,
That's, yeah,
and it really helps them begin to connect to a feeling of connection, that those
yeah,
kind of loving, warm, attachment-based feelings. It appears as though whatever they're using with the PTSD survivors really is raising that more positive spin on the world. And
yeah,
I think it's not hard to imagine that many addicts do. You know, in the experience with alcohol, what we often find is that there's a kind of camaraderie that happens with the other
right.
guys at the bar, or
Yeah, I was thinking
there's some
about
people who
that.
drink alone.
Yeah,
But really, there is a kind of culture to being an addict, as there is a culture to being in recovery, that can unfold one, that you can feel wrapped up and swaddled in something.
you're part of the club, right?
Yes, you're part of the club.
Hmm.
And I think um, marijuana does some of the same things. I'm not sure that cocaine does. The paranoia can become really difficult to
Right,
blend with
paranoia.
connection.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So with this understanding of the importance of connection
Mm,
and the importance of the social brain, I've come to think that our brain is in part socially constructed. That it's not just in our head. We think our boundaries are right here, but in fact, in many ways, they reach out much further, and and certainly our social networks and social interactions. I feel like those are important in supporting and maintaining who we are. So now we find ourselves in the time of COVID, the time of a plague, and isolated,
yes.
the exact opposite of every healing thing that you've been talking about here.
David, one of the things that I want to make sure I say before I go into my COVID talk here is that
Okay.
when you watch infants, and even if we think about our own love lives and our friendships, one of the key aspects of what the brain does for us is self-regulation, that we can regulate and maintain some buffers and boundaries around our emotions, that they can become productive. And I am a great believer in Lou Cozzolino's phrase that self-regulation is really co-regulation. You know, you watch an infant who learns over time that if I cry, if I'm stressed, if I'm scared, and I cry out, mom will, or dad will come a running, and that will soothe me. And over time, they learn to soothe themselves.
Yeah.
And I think even even in young friendships and old marriages that are good, you know, I get close to my wife when I feel mostly stressed, and she calms me, she regulates me. And for a long time, men have kind of isolated themselves from that kind of thing
Yeah.
because it sounds like weakness to talk about that, but we really do need each other to co-regulate. Hmm? Which then leads us into something like COVID. So um, I have a, interestingly enough, Norton, the publisher for my book, got back in touch with me and asked me to contribute a chapter to a book that's coming out, I think, in March or April. And the book is something about psychotherapy in the age of COVID. And so I wrote a chapter where I basically talked about all the stresses that we are facing in the age of COVID. If we just focus on COVID, that's bad enough.
Yeah.
But we also have an economic crisis.
Right.
We also have a climate crisis. COVID hit us in the middle of an opioid crisis, and aggravated it all. Plus, we have a racial reckoning that has to happen in the United States. So all that stuff gets exacerbated by COVID. And I think it's important for us. Bruce Perry, I don't know if you know Bruce Perry.
I don't think so.
Bruce is a neuropsychologist. He has the what's he call it? Anyway. He talks about we all have to stay isolated physically, but we need to continue to be in touch relationally.
Mhm.
And I have found in the age of COVID, one of the things that is really important for me has been reaching out to former students, reaching out to colleagues that I had lost touch with, and just saying, hi, I have all this time on my hands. I really want to
Yeah.
renew some things. And that has been wonderfully helpful for me, I
Yeah.
must say. And I think in terms of psychotherapy, I've noticed how many treatment centers, addiction treatment centers, have really found some joy and some new ways of doing things because they had to set up um, online and internet communications with people who were their clients, but also people who call them and say, I need help. And they say, would you like to start a virtual relationship? And that's become really important for a number of treatment settings that I know of. So
Now have
it's forced us
yeah.
as providers to get out of our offices one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, maybe more than when we were in the office,
Mhm.
in as much as maybe they now, of course, we're both using a virtual background, but they might see, oh, that's what you live like. I can see,
Yeah,
I see you've got a bunch of books in the background, and I can get a sense of who you are in your private life, which was, in the old Freudian days, that was supposedly a no-no.
it sure was.
Yeah, yeah,
We have two treatment centers close by here where I live that have um, really found creative ways to have all their counselors work from home, because we had to do that because so many of the counselors had um, younger children
yeah,
who couldn't go to school, had to work at home, and so the counselors, rather than going to their offices, needed to stay home to mind their children. But
right.
these treatment centers found ways to bill, to um, find ways to do new interviews over the internet, and to be available to their patients um, in a ways, and to find ways to get reimbursements for that. It's opened up a whole new world for the treatment centers.
Some people are saying it may not go back.
I,
This, it
I think some of it really
uh,
is embedded now.
yeah, yeah. Are you yourself doing any treatment online?
I was. Um, I had to stop so I could work on the book, and now there's been a number of things um, that have taken its place. But I just before um, COVID, I spent 10 years. I left being department chair. You'll get a kick out of this. I left being department chair, and I was so bereft of because being a department chair, I couldn't really see clients because I was publishing and being department chair and doing
Uh,
other stuff. So something had to give. When I left being department chair, I was invited by a group of cancer docs, to come and join their practice and set up a psychosocial clinic in their practice. So I was working side by side with cancer docs, And I did that for 10 years. I brought in a number of other professionals and I brought in some interns. And, but then I had to give it up to finish writing the book. And because I had some medical procedures myself that kind of got out of control. So I needed to take a step back from the clinic. But, and I just haven't gotten back into it yet.
Yeah.
Although I'm
Yeah.
renewing my license right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good for you. Um, so those doctors, the cancer doctors, there must have been somebody there that had some kind of a unusual notion that that there was some sort of social connection issue that needed to be addressed.
Oncologists are surprisingly open to that. Yes, the young doc who invited me in had his medical degrees, but then also decided to do a sideline degree in medical anthropology. So
Uh,
he was really open to psychosocial stuff, and in fact, he helped me to, because when you join a cancer practice, you have a lot of upfront learning to do to get the language. Working with docs was something I'd never really done.
uh-huh.
So I had a lot of learning to do, and he became my mentor into that for the
Uh-huh.
first year or two. But yes, they were very open
Yeah.
to it. Some of them not so much. But over time, as they got to know me, because docs, you have to earn their trust, and I was used to that from doing counseling.
Yeah.
People have to learn to trust you. But
Yeah.
by the end of it, I had docs who were sitting down with me saying, I know she needs some kind of um, medication for this. Do you know anything about Concerta? Do you know anything about? So they were asking me to help them with their prescriptions. You know, the two most heavily prescribed drugs in oncology are Xanax and what's the other one? Sertraline.
Yeah, I don't know that second one. I certainly, so these are drugs that normally are
For
deemed to
anxiety and
be
depression.
anxiety and depression, right?
They're the two most frequently prescribed
Yeah,
drugs in oncology.
yeah. Something else I want to ask you about is that comes to mind is a few weeks ago I interviewed a a woman therapist who's up in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, sort of in
Michigan,
a
yeah.
very remote kind of area. And she was strongly, and she was really into. I think she was, if I recall, was a substance abuser herself in her younger days, and was now sober. And it was her observation. She does training for counselors and private practice therapists to encourage them to work with addiction. She says that people in private practice kind of have abandoned addicts, kind of feeling like, well, let the experts deal with them, and giving up their own potential potency to be helpful in somebody's life. I just wanted to bounce that off your wall.
Oh, I think that's I'm glad to hear about her. I think she's right on target. The
Uh-huh.
the treatment centers are really good for tertiary care. You know, if you need an expert, that's the place to go. But the truth is, most primary care docs, if they can be trained, would recognize many of the people in their practice as people coping with substance misuse. You know, the DSM has now we have severe, moderate, and light
Okay.
involvement with chemicals. A lot of the docs would find that those people are in their practice. So that's one piece. The other piece is primary care practitioners of counseling can be enormous effective with addicts, with people struggling with substance misuse. and preventing it from ever becoming full-blown addiction. So what I tell my students, because my students are in a general counseling program, what I tell them all the time is that my hope in giving these courses to you is that you will become the primary care counseling practitioners who work with addicts, not who are kind of pre-addicted, who are involved with chemicals in destructive ways to them, but can be reprogrammed. And what I say, what the other thing I
Mm.
say is, addiction counseling is not some esoteric um, practice that you need to learn a special language and all that stuff. It's not. The same kind of things you're learning in our counseling program, Rogerian technique, valuing the client, helping them feel safe, prescribing mindfulness and other kinds of things, are are just what you need to
Uh-huh.
be able to work with people who are struggling with chemicals.
Yeah. Wow. That's
I
great.
think she's right on target.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think maybe it's time for us to wrap it up here. I hope we've touched all the important bases. Is there anything that you want to get in here that maybe we haven't touched on?
There is.
Okay.
Um, I was thinking about this morning. The One of the things that has really grabbed my attention, David, is thinking about addiction as an extreme behavior. And I have become really intrigued with how many common factors there are between the risk for addiction and the risk for violent extremism and white supremacy.
Mm.
I've read now a number of the autobiographies of skinheads and white supremacists who are
Yeah.
now working with people to help de-radicalize them. And what I am beginning to learn in reading their autobiographies and being in touch with some of them is that a lot of the same background, a trauma history, um, finding ways it's almost like an addiction to power and an addiction to causing pain, to restlessness, to an addiction to rage.
Mhm.
And I have become really interested in those parallels. In fact, I'm in contact with a colleague, and we're looking at maybe writing something up about this.
I was going to say, when you write that book, let's do another interview.
Okay, you've got it.
Okay.
You've got it.
Okay. So we'll wrap it up for today. And Ali, I want to say this has been a really sweet talking with you and getting a feel for the range of your ideas and the good work that you're doing.
David, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.